Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city. And we start. The desert sun was setting, streaking the sky with orange and pink as Jake and Emily Carter drove into Las Vegas. A U-Haul trailer hitched to their beat-up Ford F-150 rumbled down the highway, stuffed with everything they owned, two lives packed into cardboard boxes and duct-taped furniture. Jake gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw tense, and Emily stared out the passenger window, her brown eyes catching the first glimpses of the neon coming to life along the strip. "Vegas, baby," Jake said, forcing a smile and glancing at her. "New start. Clean slate. Are you ready for it?" Emily turned her head, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. She smiled slightly, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Yes, of course, it's bright." "Bright is an understatement," he chuckled, nodding toward the horizon ahead. The fountains of Bellagio danced in the distance, and the pyramid of Luxor sent its spotlight into the twilight. "This place doesn't sleep. Looks like we won't either." She didn't laugh, just nodded and turned back to the window. Jake left the silence hanging in the air. They had been married for 3 years, since high school in Reno, and he knew her silent moods. She will thaw once they get settled. At least that's what he convinced himself. They left Reno for a reason: too many dead-end jobs, too many late-night fights over money, too many ghosts of a life that led nowhere. Vegas was the reset button. Jake found work as a night security guard at the Pinnacle, a luxury apartment complex a block from the Strip, guarding millionaires and their Ferraris. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than warehouse jobs at home. Emily hasn't found anything yet, but she'll figure it out. She always figured it out. Their new apartment was a one-room apartment on the outskirts of town, a beige stucco box in a complex called Desert Rose. It was nothing special. The paint on the walls was peeling, the kitchen counter was stained with someone else's coffee, but it was theirs. They carried boxes until midnight, sweat sticking to Jake's back under his t-shirt, while Emily silently sorted the dishes. "Hungry?" he asked, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "There was that diner we passed by. You can get a burger or something." She looked up from the stack of plates. "I'm fine. Tired, mostly." "Come on, Em. First night in Vegas. Gotta do something." She sighed, setting the plate down a little harder than necessary. "Okay, let's go." The diner was called Neon Spoon, a 24-hour place with chrome counters and red vinyl couches, with an Elvis jukebox blaring in the corner. Jake ordered a double cheeseburger with fries. Emily picked at the Cobb salad. The waitress, a bleached blonde named Tammy with the husky voice of a smoker, called them sweetheart and refilled their coffee without asking. "So," Jake said, popping a potato into his mouth, "I start tomorrow night, 11 to 7. Boss says mostly just walk the perimeter, check cards. Easy money." Emily nodded, spearing a piece of lettuce. "Sounds good. What kind of place is it?" "Chic as hell. Fences, cameras everywhere, guys in suits tipping jacks with $50. I wonder who lives there." "Rich people," she answered dryly, finally looking up. "That's who?" He grinned. "Yeah, no joke. Maybe I'll see some celebrities. I'll be guarding Brad Pitt's penthouse or something." For the first time, she smiled truly, albeit faintly. "You probably would have asked him for an autograph right on shift." "Damn, I definitely would have asked." They laughed, and for a minute it was like before the quarrels, before the bills. Jake reached across the table, touching her fingers with his. "We can handle this, Em. I promise." She didn't remove her hand, but her smile faded. "I know you want this." Jake's first shift at the Pinnacle passed in a blur of polished marble and glass. The complex was a fortress, 10 floors of condominiums with floor-to-ceiling windows, a rooftop pool glowing blue in the night sky, and the lobby smelling of money and leather. His uniform is a black polo shirt and tactical pants, with a walkie-talkie on his belt. The boss, a stocky guy named Rico with short hair and a stern look, gave the briefing. Walk the perimeter every hour. Check garages. Residents call look into lost keys, noise complaints, whatever. Don't touch anything unnecessary. Got it. Got it, Jake said, adjusting his cap. Rico grinned. You're going to see some crap around here, kid. Keep your head down, your hands clean. The night passed slowly, silently, except for the hum of the strip, a block away, car horns, laughter, the occasional siren. Jake walked around the area with a flashlight, feeling the weight of the place pressing down on him. These people lived in another world. Doormen let in prostitutes in stiletto heels, guys with Rolexes spilled out of Lambos, women in furs, despite the desert heat. He wasn't jealous, not exactly, but he couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to have that kind of money. Don't check your bill before going grocery shopping. By 3 a.m., he was standing at the main gate when a black SUV pulled up. The driver, a man in his 40s with slicked back hair and a tailored suit, showed his card. Jake waved at him, catching a glimpse of the passenger, a blonde in a tight dress, giggling as she pressed herself against the man's shoulder. Jake shook his head and went back to his rounds. He came home at 7:30. The apartment was still dark. Emily was spread out on the bed, one leg tangled in the sheet, her breathing quiet and even. He kicked off his shoes, grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, and collapsed onto the couch. The first night is over. He will do it. Emily woke up to an empty apartment, the clock flashing 10:14 m. Jake wasn't there, probably catching up on sleep after his shift. She padded into the kitchen, made some coffee, and stood by the window, looking out over Vegas beyond the parking lot. The city sparkled even during the day, all glass and steel and promise. It was different from the dusty streets and faded casinos of Reno. Everything here was alive, electric, as if it could swallow you if you were too careless. She agreed to the move because Jake was so damn sure. He described it for weeks, better salary, more opportunities, a chance to break out. She nodded and collected her boxes, but deep down she wasn't sure. Reno was small, yes, but his own. She knew the bartenders at Patty's, the shortcuts through downtown, what the mountains looked like at sunset. Vegas was foreign, loud, brash, overwhelming. The phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Jake. Survived the first night. How are you? She replied, normal. The coffee is ready. You. They squeezed like a lemon. Home soon. She put her phone down and walked around the apartment, unpacking a couple more boxes, books, a cracked mug from their first trip, a photo of them smiling like idiots from Lake Tahoe. She stuck the photo on the refrigerator with a magnet and stepped back. They looked happy then, and now? By noon, she felt unbearable. Jake would be back in hours, and the apartment seemed too small, too quiet. She grabbed her bag and walked out, without a plan, just to get moving. It was a 20-minute walk to the Strip, and she found herself there almost by accident, caught up in the chaos of tourists snapping selfies, street performers juggling fire, the clang of machine guns blaring from the open doors of the casino. She stopped at the Venetian, watching the gondolas glide along fake canals under a fake sky. A guy in a suit pushed past, his sharp, expensive cologne hitting his nose, chatting on Bluetooth about closing the deal. A woman in heels and a sequin dress was handing out flyers for the club, her smile plastic but perfect. Everywhere you looked, everyone was looking for something: money, thrills, a thrill that you couldn't find anywhere else. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Jake. Where are you? Yes, she answered. I'm walking. I'm looking at the city. Be careful. I love. And I you. She pocketed the phone and walked on, the neon lights flashing brighter as the day faded. The casino sign lit up. Win big tonight. She looked at it for a long time, then turned down a side street, letting the city suck her in. Jake's second night at the Pinnacle was more eventful. The tenant locked himself outside at 1 a.m., muttering about a lost poker game, and Jake had to call the technicians to let him in. Later, a woman from the penthouse complained about suspicious sounds outside the window. It turned out that a palm branch was scratching the glass. Rico was right. There was some weird shit going on here. He was on break at 4 in the morning, leaning against the security booth with cold coffee when a silver Mercedes pulled up. The driver is a guy of about 30, a sharp chin, mirrored aviators even at night. He rolled down the window, flashing a smile. "Hey man, are you new?" he asked, his voice smooth as if rehearsed. "Yes," Jake said, straightening up. "Started yesterday." "Cool, cool. I'm Derek. I live in 8C. You'll see me." He nodded towards the passenger seat, where a woman in a red dress was sitting, her head glued to her phone. "This is Sasha. Say hi, baby." Sasha looked up, waved her hand languidly, and returned to the screen. "Nice to meet you," Jake said, keeping his tone professional. "If you need anything, call." Derek laughed, a little louder than necessary. "Oh, I'll call. Keep the trash away, okay?" Jake nodded as the gate opened, watching Mercedes disappear into the garage. There was something about this guy that bothered him, too slippery, too confident, but he shrugged it off. It's not his place to judge. When he returned home, Emily was awake, sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine, the TV quietly murmuring. She looked up as he tossed the keys onto the counter. "Rough night?" she asked. "Not really. Drunks and palm trees, mostly." He took the beer and sat down next to her, throwing his legs up. "And you?" "Just walking today. It's too much." "Yes, there is such a thing." He took a sip, looking at her. "Are you okay?" She hesitated, turning the glass in her hands. "I don't know. It's different here. Everyone seems to be pretending to be someone else." He frowned as he put the bottle down. "Are you talking about us?" "No," she said quickly, then more quietly. "No, about the city. It's loud." He took her hand, squeezing it. "We'll get used to it. Together." She nodded, but her eyes remained on the TV, where they were playing a late-night slot machine jackpot ad. Jake looked at her for a moment longer, then leaned back, letting the noise of the apartment fill the silence. Emily barely slept that week. Jake's night shifts upended their schedule. He slept in during the day. She wandered around the apartment alone. She started walking the strip more often, not because she liked it, but because sitting still was worse. Lights, noise, perpetual motion. It was a drug that she did not want, but could not quit. On Friday, she found herself at the bar at Caesar's Palace, a stylish place with velvet chairs and bartenders in vests. She ordered a gin and tonic and drank it slowly, looking out at the crowd. A guy sat down next to him, tall, dark hair, a suit that screamed about money. He did not immediately look at her, ordered whiskey without ice, and glanced at his watch. "First time here?" he asked after a while, his voice casual, as if he didn't care whether she answered or not. She glanced at him. "In Vegas?" "No, just moved." He nodded, spinning the glass. "It's not easy to get used to." "Where from?" "Rhino." "Small town girl, huh?" He grinned, not maliciously, just teasingly. "I'm Nick." "Emily." They chatted for an hour, nothing serious, superficial. When he asked for the number, she hesitated, then scribbled it on a napkin. "Just friends," she said, half to him and half to herself. "Of course," Nick said, putting the napkin away with a grin. "Friends." She left the bar with ease, gin coursing through her veins. The neon lights outside were brighter than ever, and for the first time since arriving, Vegas didn't feel so heavy. Jake noticed a change in her within a couple of days. She got up earlier, went out more often, and hummed while preparing food. He didn't ask, he decided that she was getting used to it, finding her rhythm. Work kept him busy. The Pinnacle was a machine that didn't stop. He liked it, he liked the structure. Rico even tapped him on the shoulder one night and told him he was reliable. It's nice to be good at something. On Saturday, he was on duty in the garage when Derek drove up again, now in a Porsche, Sasha in the passenger seat, as always on the phone. Derek leaned out the window, aviators glinting under the sodium lamps. "Yo, Jake, yeah," he shouted. "Yes," Jake said, coming closer. "Hi, Derek." "Dude, you're like a local already." What's your story? Former cop or something? Nah, just a guy who needs money. Derek laughed. Honestly. Listen, do you sit down at the tables? I can show you how to play. Jake shrugged. Not very adventurous. It's a shame. You're missing out on a lot. Derek nodded at Sasha. She's a real predator. She cleans me out every time. Sasha did not look up, muttering, dream. Jake forced a smile. Maybe another time. Deal, Derek said, accelerating as the gate rose. Jake watched them leave, shaking his head. People like Derek were the embodiment of Vegas, bright, loud, always in pursuit of a buzz. He wasn't sure if he'd get used to it, but he didn't have to. His job is to keep the gates closed and the trash outside. On Sunday morning, when he returned home, he found Emily frying eggs in the kitchen. She looked good, her hair pulled back and her loose t-shirt slid off one shoulder. He threw the keys and hugged her from behind, kissing her neck. "Good morning, stranger," he said. She laughed, clinging to him. "Morning. Are you hungry?" "I'm dying." They ate at the table, sunlight streaming through the blinds, and for a moment everything was right. Vegas was loud, yes, but they'll cut out their piece. Together. He didn't yet know about the napkin with Nick's number hidden in her bag on the counter. I didn't know yet. The days in Vegas dragged on for Emily in a long series of emptiness. Jake left for his 12-hour shifts at the Pinnacle, leaving her alone in their small apartment with peeling paint and a view of the parking lot. He left at 6 in the evening, when the sun was still hanging above the horizon, and returned at 6 in the morning, when the city was just beginning to calm down after another sleepless night. His boots clicked on the linoleum as he got ready, and then the door slammed and silence covered everything like a dusty blanket. Emily tried to keep herself busy. She unpacked the last of the boxes, arranged the books on the rickety IKEA shelf, even wiped down the stains on the kitchen counter that wouldn't come off. But by midweek, the apartment was ready, and there was nothing more to do. The TV was blaring in the background, endless commercials for casinos and shows and 9.99 stakes, but she was barely listening. Outside the window came the sounds of parties. Laughter, glass clinking, low-bass music from someone's car. Vegas lived his own life, and she sat inside, as if in a cage. Boredom is a dangerous thing, she thought one day, standing by the window with a mug of cold tea. The city behind the glass beckoned, winked with neon, whispered that there was something more out there than these four walls. She shook her head, driving away the thoughts, and turned on the radio, but even the old rock could not drown out this call. Jake, meanwhile, was getting into the rhythm of work. 12 hours on his feet was no joke, but he managed. The night shifts at the Pinnacle were a strange mixture of routine and chaos. He walked in circles around the perimeter, checking cameras, answering calls from residents who either lost their keys or complained about their neighbors. Sometimes we came across colorful types, like that old man from the 5th floor who at 3 o'clock in the morning demanded to find his cat, which had escaped onto the balcony. The cat, of course, was sitting there, curled up in a ball, but Jake still received a 20 tip and a pat on the shoulder. "You did great, guy," the old man said, handing over a crumpled bill. "Keep your tail to the gun." "Thank you, sir," Jake replied, hiding his smile. The money was small, but the praise warmed me. Rico, his boss, also noticed the effort. On the third night, he approached Jake during his break while he was drinking coffee at the gate. "You haven't screwed up yet," Rico said, crossing his arms. "That's something. Most newbies mess up in the first week." "I try," Jake shrugged. "Work is work." "Yes, but it's not just work here. There's a circus with horses. You'll see more." Rico was right. The next night, Jake walked in on two drunk girls trying to climb over the fence at the rooftop pool. They giggled, clinging to the netting as their heels got stuck in the grass. He helped them down, called a taxi, and walked them to the car, ignoring their winks and offers to hang out. By morning, he was exhausted, but happy he had everything under control. At home, he would collapse on the sofa, take off his shoes, and open a beer while Emily was still asleep. Sometimes she woke up when he arrived, cooked scrambled eggs, or simply sat next to him while he talked about another eccentric from work. But more often she slept, and he did not wake her. He liked that she was nearby, even if she was silent. Emily didn't tell Jake that boredom was beginning to stifle her. She didn't want to burden him. He was already working hard, returning with red eyes and calluses on his feet. But by the end of the first week, she could no longer sit indoors. On Friday night, when Jake left for his shift, she put on jeans, an old t-shirt, and sneakers, grabbed her bag, and went out. Streep greeted her like an old friend, noisy, flamboyant, ruthless. She wandered aimlessly, simply absorbing the chaos. Tourists crowded the fountains, street vendors sold glow sticks, and shouts of joy and the clink of coins could be heard from the casino. She walked into one of them, the MGM Grand, just to have a look. Inside, it was like being in another world, carpets with psychedelic patterns, flashing machine guns, the smell of cigarettes and perfume. She sat down at the cheap slot, threw in $1 and pulled the lever. The screen spun, then stopped. Nothing. She shrugged and left. On the street, she came across an open-air bar where live music was playing. Some guy with a guitar was singing about lost love. She ordered a beer, sat down at a rickety table, and began to listen. The beer was cold, the music was loud, and for the first time in a week, she felt like she was breathing. One, a voice nearby pulled her out of her thoughts. She looked up. A guy, about 30, wearing a shirt with rolled-up sleeves and light stubble. A bottle of Corona in my hands. Yes, she said, not particularly friendly, but not rude either. Cool. May I? He nodded to the chair opposite. She shrugged. Go ahead. His name was Kyle. He was in Vegas for work, something about selling casino equipment. The conversation started naturally. He joked about tourists. She said that she had just moved. He didn't bother with questions, didn't pretend to be macho, and she liked that. An hour later, he left, leaving her a second beer and wishing her luck. He didn't ask for a number, and she was glad. But the seed was sown. Vegas was calling her, and she began to answer. The following week, Emily began to go out more often. While Jake slept during the day, she walked, sometimes along the strip, sometimes along small streets where tourists did not go. She found a coffee shop with shabby couches and decent lattes and sat there for hours, scrolling through her phone or just staring out the window. Sometimes I went to bars, sometimes I just wandered around until my legs began to tingle. She liked to be on the move. She liked that no one knew her. One Wednesday night, she found herself back at that bar at Caesar's Palace where she had met Nick. She wasn't looking for him, but when he walked in, wearing the same suit, with the same confidence, her heart skipped a beat. He noticed her immediately and approached with a smile. Emily, right? He said, sitting down without invitation. Thought you were missing. I live here, she replied, sipping her gin and tonic. You won't get lost. Okay? Otherwise, I thought you ditched me. He winked and ordered whiskey. How's Vegas? Loud, she said, but I'm getting used to it. They chatted like last time lightly, about nothing. He told me about the deal he closed, about the client who almost ruined everything because of a drunken stunt in the casino. She laughed and told me about her walks. He listened, leaning a little closer than necessary, but she didn't move away. Are you sitting here alone? He asked at one point, nodding towards the empty chair nearby. My husband is at work, she said, and it sounded harsher than she intended. Nick nodded without changing his expression. Got it. Night shifts? Yes, security guard. It must be hard. What are you doing? Nothing yet, she admitted. Looking for myself, I guess. Vegas is a good place for it, he said. Everyone is looking here. She didn't answer, but his words stuck in her head. When he asked for her number again, she gave it the same one as on the napkin, just so as not to argue. He left after half an hour, leaving her with her third gin and a vague feeling that she had crossed some kind of line. Jake didn't notice anything. He was too busy with work, too tired. But on Friday morning, when he returned home, he found Emily in the kitchen, making coffee, humming something under her breath. She looked more alive than before, and that made him happy. "You're in the mood," he said, throwing the keys on the table. "Just a nice day," she replied, placing the mug in front of him. "How was the shift?" "Usually. Some idiot tried to start a motorcycle in the garage at 4 in the morning. Woke up half the house." She laughed. "Did you catch him?" "Yes, I kicked him out. Rico said I was great." He sipped his coffee, looking at her. "What did you do?" "Walking," she said, shrugging. "I saw the city." "Cool. Maybe we can go somewhere together on the weekend. I have Sunday free." "Go ahead," she nodded, smiling. "We haven't been out for a long time." He smiled back, feeling that everything was getting better. Vegas was weird, but they stuck it out. He didn't know that there was a phone in her bag, which already had 2 unread messages from Nick. "Nice to meet you," and "if anything, right." Didn't know she didn't delete them. Emily didn't plan on getting involved in Vegas nightlife. It happened by itself, like sand being pulled into a dune step by step, until you notice that you are already knee-deep. After that Saturday at the live music bar, she started going out more often, not every night, but enough that the apartment began to feel more like a transit point than a home. Jake didn't notice anything. His 12-hour shifts were so exhausting that he returned only to collapse on the sofa or bed. She made him coffee in the morning, waved as he left, and waited for the door to slam so she could start her own day. Or night. It all started with that chance meeting at the MGM Grand. Emily went there on Tuesday just to kill time. She wasn't going to play. The slots didn't appeal to her, and blackjack seemed too difficult. But the casino was crowded, the air was buzzing with laughter and the clinking of coins, and she decided to sit at the bar, ordering a margarita. There she met Lisa. Lisa was short, with short red hair and a nose piercing, wearing a black casino waitress uniform. She plopped down in the chair next to Emily during her break, tossing the tray of empty glasses onto the counter. "New girl?" Lisa asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. Her voice was hoarse but warm. Emily shrugged. "Something like that. Just moved in recently." "Welcome to the circus," Lisa chuckled, ordering a Coke. "I've been here for 2 years. My name is Lisa. Are you?" "Emily." "Cool. Hanging out alone?" "My husband is at work," Emily said, twirling a straw in her glass. "Night shifts." "Oh, I'm sorry. My ex worked too hard until he ran off with some showgirl. Fucking Vegas." Lisa rolled her eyes, but smiled. "What are you doing?" "Nothing yet. Just looking around." Lisa nodded as if this was the most normal answer. "Well, if you're bored, come here. I work from 8 to 2. Always happy to chat." Emily smiled back, and that could have been the end of it. But after a couple of days, she returned. Lisa turned out to be more than just a chatterbox. She was a ticket into a world that Emily was just beginning to notice. On her 3rd visit to MGM, Lisa introduced her to Kate, a tall blonde with sharp cheekbones and a butterfly tattoo on her wrist. Kate worked as a dealer at the poker table, and that evening she was on break, sitting with them at the bar with a bottle of water in her hand. "New girl, huh?" Kate said, looking at Emily with a slight squint. "You don't look like the locals." "I'm from Reno," Emily answered, already getting used to the question. "Wow, village," Kate laughed. "Well, welcome to the big world. Did Lisa adopt you?" "Sort of," Lisa grinned. "She's bored, Kate. We need to entertain her." "Bored in Vegas?" Kate raised an eyebrow. "This is a crime. Are you playing?" "Not really," Emily admitted. "I tried slots, but it's not my thing." "Slots for tourists," Kate snorted. "Poker is where life is. Do you want me to show you?" Emily hesitated. "I don't know the rules." "I'll teach you," Kate said, standing up. "The break is over, but after your shift, come to the tables. You'll see how I work." Emily nodded, more out of politeness than interest. But that night, after Lisa had finished serving cocktails and Kate had waved off her shift, The three of them found themselves at a small table in the corner of the casino. Kate pulled the deck out of her pocket and began shuffling the cards with such dexterity that Emily couldn't help but stare. "Look," Kate said, laying out the cards. "Poker is not just about luck. It's about people. You read them, not the cards." "How is this?" Emily asked, moving closer. "The eyes, the hands, the way they breathe," Kate explained. "Some people jerk their legs when they're bluffing. Some people look at their cards too long when they're in the shit. You learn to see." Lisa giggled. "Kate is a shark. Don't play with her for money." "I'm not going to," Emily laughed, but something sank in her chest. It wasn't just about cards. It was about control, about a game where she could be more than just a spectator. From that evening, Emily began visiting MGM more often. Not every day, she didn't want Jake to suspect anything, but a couple times a week. When he left for his shift, she would put on jeans and a sweater, put on lipstick, and go to the casino. Lisa and Kate became her window into Vegas nightlife, a world where the rules were flexible and the stakes weren't always measured in chips. Kate taught her poker. Not to play seriously that required money, which Emily didn't have but to understand. They sat after Kate's shift, sometimes until 3 in the morning, laying out cards on the table in the staff room. Kate explained the combinations: flush, straight, full house. Emily learned slowly, but she liked it. It was like a puzzle that she could put together if she tried. "You've got the chops," Kate said one night as she lit a cigarette. "Don't make a fuss. This is important." "I'm just watching," Emily replied, shuffling the deck as Kate indicated. "Looking is half the battle," Kate nodded. "The rest is deciding when to take risks." Lisa, sitting next to a can of cola, chuckled. "Listen to her, Em. She'll get you in, and you'll be putting your car on the line." "I don't have a car," Emily laughed. "Then husband," Lisa winked. Emily rolled her eyes, but the joke left an aftertaste. She didn't tell them anything about Jake, except that he worked nights. They didn't ask, and she didn't want to share. This world Lisa, Kate, the cards was hers, separate from what awaited her at home. Jake, meanwhile, lived at his own pace. Working at the Pinnacle has become familiar, although not easier. He already knew the residents by name. The old man with the cat, whose name was Mr. Gibson, regularly called him for coffee, and Derek from 8C said hello every time he drove by in another expensive car. One night Derek stopped at the gate, leaned out of the window of his BMW and shouted, "Hey Jake, when are you going to sit down? I owe you a lesson." "Maybe when I win the lottery," Jake joked as he opened the gate. "You don't know what you're missing." Derek accelerated and the car disappeared into the garage. Jake shook his head. He didn't understand these people: Derek, his girlfriend Sasha, all these rich people who were throwing money away. But he liked that he was part of this world, even if it was outside. He kept order, and this gave him the feeling that he was not just a cog. At home, he noticed that Emily began to leave more often. She'd say, "Take a walk," or "Meet a friend," and he wouldn't dig any deeper. He liked that she had perked up, no longer sitting there blankly staring at the wall. On Sunday, when he had the day off, they went to that diner, Neon Spoon, and for the first time in a long time they chatted like before. She laughed at his stories about work, and he teased her for her love of pickles. Everything was almost like in Reno, only with neon outside the window instead of mountains. "Are you okay?" he asked as they walked home holding hands. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'm just getting used to it." "Me too," he nodded. "But we're managing, right?" "Yes," she smiled, and he believed. Emily didn't tell him about poker. She didn't talk about Lisa and Kate, about the nights in the casino, where she learned not only cards, but also how to hold her face, how to hide the trembling in her hands when someone nearby raised the bet. She didn't say that last night Kate took her to a real table not to play, but just to stand next to her and watch the pros work. "Can you feel it?" Kate whispered as a guy in a cowboy hat grabbed chips. "This is not a game. This is war." Emily nodded, watching the players look at each other, their fingers fiddling with the cards. She loved it: the tension, the risk, the feeling of being on the edge of something big. She didn't gamble herself, but she began to think about betting differently, not only in poker. That night, after returning home at 4 in the morning, she went to bed while Jake was still on shift. She dreamed that she was sitting at a table, holding cards, and across from her was Nick, that guy from the bar, with his smooth smile and eyes that saw too much. She woke up with her heart pounding and realized that Vegas was changing her, and the old rules no longer apply. Jake wasn't one to nitpick. He grew up in a family where money was counted only before payday and bills were paid late, but without panic. In Reno, he and Emily lived modestly. They rented a tiny apartment, ate macaroni and cheese if the week was tough, and did not complain. Moving to Vegas was supposed to change that. New job, more hours, more dollars in my pocket. And for the first weeks, it was like that. His salary from the Pinnacle fell into the general account, and he even began to save a couple of hundred for a rainy day. But by the end of the second week, something went wrong. He noticed this by chance. On Friday morning, after his shift, he sat on the couch with his phone, checking his balance through his banking app. They agreed with Emily to keep everything on one account. It's easier to keep track, easier to plan. The screen showed $1 in $237.43. He frowned. After the last salary, there should have been closer to $2,000, even taking into account rent and food. He scrolled through the transactions. $300 in rent, $75 in electricity, $42 at the supermarket a couple of days ago. Everything looked fine, but the numbers didn't add up. He called, putting the coffee on the table. She was in the kitchen, washing dishes, humming something under her breath. She responded without turning around. Did you buy anything this week, besides food? She froze for a second, then turned off the water and dried her hands with a towel. Well, yes, some little things. What? I was just checking my account. There's less money than I thought. Emily turned around, leaning against the counter. Her face was calm, but the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. Maybe gasoline? I've driven a couple of times. On what? Jake frowned. Their old Ford had been parked in the parking lot. Since they arrived, he only took it to work, and she didn't drive it at all. Oh, right, she corrected, smiling. I wanted to say I went to a coffee shop, and I bought new sneakers. The old ones were torn. He nodded, rubbing the back of his head. How much are sneakers? Cheap, $50, she said with a shrug. Sorry, I should have said it. Come on, everything's fine, he waved it off. Just following, you know. Vegas is an expensive city. I know, she nodded, returning to the dishes. I'll be more careful. Jake took a sip of his coffee, looking at her back. $50 sneakers, coffee a couple times a week didn't explain the hole in his bill, but he didn't dig. Emily is not one to throw money away. He was probably just tired and had trouble counting. 12 hours on your feet will exhaust anyone. Emily exhaled as Jake fell silent. She hated lying to him, not that it was an outright lie, more like an understatement. She actually bought the sneakers, but not for 50, but for 20 at a second-hand store on the outskirts. Coffee at the coffee shop cost $4, and she bought it a couple of times, but not every day. The truth was different, and she kept it behind her teeth like a card up her sleeve. The money went to MGM Grand. Not much. She hasn't played herself, at least not yet. But the nightlife was more expensive than she thought. Beers with Lisa and Kate, a couple of cocktails when they persuaded her to stay longer, tips for the bartender so he wouldn't grumble when they sat at an empty table. And also transportation. She started taking taxis back, because walking back along the strip at 3 in the morning was uncomfortable. It all added up. $10 here, 20 there, and now 100 disappeared in a week. She didn't mean to spend that much. At first it was just to have fun, then relax, and now she couldn't stop. Lisa and Kate became her anchor in this city. Without them, Vegas would be just noise outside the window. And with them, he was alive, real, and she felt like she was part of something bigger than an apartment on Desert Rose. Yesterday, Kate dragged her to the poker table again, not to play, but to watch. Emily stood behind the dealer, watching as a man in a leather jacket lost $200 in 10 minutes. He threw the chips on the table, swore and walked away, and Kate whispered in her ear, "See, he's panicking. That's why he's dumping it." "Would you have one?" Emily asked. "If she played, yes," Kate grinned. "But I don't play. Ideal." Emily nodded, but a thought swirled in her head. What if she sat at the table herself? Not now, of course she didn't have that kind of money. But someday, it was like a challenge, like a promise that Vegas whispered to her every night. Jake decided not to dwell. On Saturday morning, he counted it all again, sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad and pen. Salary minus rent, minus utilities, minus food, you should have about $1,500 left. But there was $1,180 in the account. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Maybe the bank charged some kind of commission, or did he forget about some payment? Emily sat across from her, scrolling through her phone, and he didn't bring up the topic again. She looked pleased, she hummed something while making coffee, and even suggested going to the movies this weekend. Why ruin the morning? "Is everything okay with the money?" she asked suddenly, without looking up from the screen. "Yeah, sort of," he said, closing the notepad. "Just checking. You're right, little things have come up." She nodded, and the conversation died down. Jake went to bed. The shift was exhausting, and in the evening he went back to work. He didn't see Emily purse her lips as she looked at the phone. There was a message from Kate. "Today there is movement in Mirage. Come, it will be fun." She replied, "Maybe," and put the phone in her pocket. That night, Emily went to the Mirage. She told herself it was just a party to watch, drink beer, chat with the girls. But Mirage was not MGM. Here everything was brighter, louder, more expensive. Lisa met her at the entrance, wearing a tight top and bright lipstick that wasn't part of her uniform. "Well, finally," she shouted over the music. "Kate's already inside. Let's go." They pushed through the crowd to the bar, where Kate was standing with some guy in an open-necked shirt. He was tall, with a chain around his neck and a smile that screamed, "I'm in charge here." Kate introduced him as Tony, a friend from old times. "Emily, huh?" Tony said, holding out his hand. "Heard you're new to the game." "I'm not playing," she replied, shaking his hand. "Just looking." "While you're watching," he winked. "Everyone starts like this." Emily smiled, but something tightened inside her. Tony ordered tequila shots for everyone, and she didn't refuse. She didn't want to seem like a stranger. The alcohol burned her throat, and Lisa laughed, slapping her on the back. "This is my girl," she said. "Relax, Em. This is Vegas." They hung out at the Mirage until midnight, drinking, dancing to the thumping beat, watching Tony flirt with the waitresses. Then he suggested going to the tables. "We'll just see," he said, winking at Emily. "You're studying, right?" She nodded, and the four of them walked towards the poker area. Tony sat down to play, and Emily, Lisa, and Kate stood nearby. He was good, calm, confident, raking in chips with a smile, as if it didn't mean anything. Half an hour later, he stood up, put a couple of hundred in his pocket, and said, "Easy money. Want to try it, Emily?" "I don't have it with me," she shook her head. "Next time," he said, patting her on the shoulder. "You're on the team." She laughed, but the words stuck in her head. On the team. She liked it, being part of something where she was not just the guard's wife, but someone else. Someone who decides. A taxi home cost $25. She pulled it out of her wallet, knowing it was her last cash for the rest of the week. There was less than 1,000 left in the account, and she knew Jake would soon notice. But that night, as she fell asleep to the hum of the air conditioner, she thought not about the money, but about the cards in Tony's hands and what it would be like to hold them herself. Jake woke up around noon on Sunday. Emily slept next to her, her breathing even, her hair scattered across the pillow. He stood up, made some coffee, and opened the bank app again. Balance, $987.12. He froze. Yesterday, there were more than 1,000. He scrolled through the transactions, nothing new except a cash withdrawal from the Mirage ATM at $243 $40 plus commission. He put the mug on the table, his heart pounding. Mirage. Emily didn't say she went there. He looked at her through the open bedroom door. She slept, serene, as if nothing had happened. Maybe this is a mistake, or is she hiding something? Jake had been feeling for 2 weeks that something was wrong. The money was slipping away like water through fingers, and Emily's explanations, coffee, sneakers, small change, sounded less and less convincing. He didn't want to suspect her, didn't want to be the guy who rummaged through other people's things or interrogated her. But after he saw a withdrawal from an ATM at Mirage, doubts began to gnaw at him from the inside. He didn't ask her that morning, he didn't have the courage. She slept so peacefully, and he was too tired to understand. Instead, he left for his shift, deciding that he would talk later. Maybe everything will explain itself. Work at the Pinnacle that night was hard. Some idiot from the 6th floor got drunk and decided it would be fun to throw bottles from the balcony into the pool. Jake and Rico fished him out of the apartment for half an hour while he yelled about his rights and the freedom of America. By 4 in the morning, Jake was at his limit, his legs were buzzing, his head was pounding, and the coffee in the thermos had long gone cold. When his shift ended, he was standing at the gate, taking off his uniform cap, when Travis, another guard, a lanky guy from Utah who worked the day shift and sometimes relieved the night shift, approached him. Travis was the type who always smiled, even when the world was falling apart, and Jake respected him for that. "Hey, man," Travis said, tapping him on the shoulder. "You look like you've been run over by a truck. Let's go to the casino and relax. Let's have a beer, throw a couple of bucks in the slots. My car is out front." Jake hesitated. Usually, after his shift, he would go home, grab a beer from the refrigerator, and pass out on the couch. But today, the fatigue was different, not just physical, but somehow viscous, oppressive. Maybe the noise of the casino will distract him from his thoughts. "Okay," he nodded, "but only beer. I'm not a gambler." "Deal," Travis grinned. "Let's go to Mirage. It's fun." Mirage greeted them with a wave of light and sound. Golden lights above the entrance, palm trees in the hall, the smell of expensive perfume and cigarette smoke. Travis led him through the crowd of tourists, past the slots and blackjack tables, to the bar in the center of the room. They grabbed a bottle of Bud Light and Travis started blabbering about his girlfriend, who threatened to leave him if he didn't stop spending money on bets. "She's right, you know," Jake said, taking a sip of his beer. "This place sucks everything." "Yes, but how can we resist here?" Travis nodded towards the crowd. "Look, everyone is happy, until they lose." Jake chuckled, looking around. People around were laughing, slapping each other on the back. Someone shouted with joy at the roulette wheel. He was about to suggest leaving. He had finished his beer, and he wanted to sleep more and more when suddenly his gaze caught on something in the corner of the hall, near the poker tables. Emily stood there. Hi, Emily. But this was not the Emily he left at home. She was wearing a short black dress that he had never seen, with a low neckline and sequins that caught the light. Heels, bright lipstick, hair loss in waves. She was laughing, throwing her head back, and hanging on the arm of some guy tall, in an open-collared shirt, with a chain around his neck and a smile that made Jake's insides go cold. The guy whispered something in her ear, and she laughed again, placing her hand on his chest. In her other hand, she had a glass with something bright, a cocktail, probably. She looked drunk, but not just drunk, free, alive, alien. Jake froze, the bottle in his hand becoming ice cold. He couldn't look away. The guy, the same Tony he'd seen briefly on the news about local players, put his arm around Emily's waist, and she didn't move away. They stood at the table where the chips lay, and two more girls were hanging around, one red-haired, the other blonde with a tattoo. Jake didn't know them, but he felt that they were part of this world, where Emily had gone without him. "Hey, are you okay?" Travis touched him on the shoulder. "You turned pale." Jake swallowed, setting the bottle down on the counter. "Yeah, just saw someone." Travis followed his gaze and whistled. "Wow, is this your wife?" "Yes," Jake managed, his voice like someone else's. "Dude, she's hanging out with Tony Martinez." This guy is a local legend. He wins like the cards are going his way. Jake didn't answer. He watched as Tony ran his hand down Emily's back and as she smiled back at him. Laughter, touches, her fingers squeezing a glass, all this cut into his brain like a knife. The cold in my chest gave way to heat, then cold again. He wanted to go over, grab her, ask her what the hell was going on. But the legs did not move. He didn't make a scene that wasn't his style. Instead, he turned to Travis. "I'll go home," he said quietly. "See you." "Are you sure? Do you want me to?" Travis began, but Jake was already walking towards the exit. The road home was like a fog. He took a taxi and didn't get in with Travis. He didn't want any questions. The apartment was dark and quiet, except for the air conditioner humming in the corner. Jake threw his cap on the table, sat down on the sofa, and stared at the wall. The clock showed 7:14 am. Emily was not there. He knew that she would return sooner or later and decided to wait. He didn't sleep. I couldn't. Her thoughts were spinning like a broken machine. Where did she get this dress? When did you start hanging out with people like Tony? Why didn't you tell me? And money, everything came together. Not coffee, not sneakers. Casino, rates, nightlife, which he did not notice while he was guarding other people's penthouses. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the door slammed. Emily came in staggering, her heels in her hands, her dress wrinkled. She threw her bag on the floor and froze when she saw him on the sofa. "Jake," voice hoarse, surprised. "Are you awake?" "No," he said, looking at her. The eyes were heavy and calm, but inside everything was seething. "Where were you?" She hesitated and ran her hand through her hair. "With friends. We were walking." "In Mirage?" he asked, and she shuddered. "Where are you from?" "I saw you," he interrupted, standing up. "With this guy, Tony, right? You were hanging on him, drunk, in a dress I don't know. And the money, it's not going to coffee, right? You're pouring it there." Emily turned pale, but quickly pulled herself together. She straightened up, kicking her heels to the side. "Were you following me?" "No, I was there with Travis, just for a drink, and then I saw you." He stepped closer, his voice becoming harsher. "Tell the truth. What's going on?" She was silent, looking at the floor, then raised her eyes. There was a challenge mixed with fatigue. "Yes, I was in the casino. Yes, I spend money, but it's not what you think." "What is this?" he barked. "You're hanging out with some jerk while I'm working all night. Do you even know what that looks like?" "You don't understand," she snapped, stepping towards him. "You just don't understand Vegas. This is how everyone lives here. This isn't Reno, Jake. You can't sit at home and wait for life to come. I'm tired of being a nobody." "Nobody?" He stared at her as if she had hit him. "Am I nobody to you?" "No, you're not," she said, softening her tone. "But I don't want to be just your wife who makes coffee and watches TV. There, in the casino, I'm alive. I'm learning. I'm with people who are not just surviving." "Are you studying?" He chuckled bitterly. "What? How do we spend our money on Tony?" "I'm not sleeping with him," she snapped. "If that's what you're thinking. I'm not even playing, not yet. I'm just there. It's not about him, it's about me." Jake fell silent, looking at her. She stood in front of him drunk, disheveled, but with a fire in her eyes that he had not seen for a long time. He wanted to scream, he wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her, but instead he asked, "How much did you spend?" She looked away. "I don't know exactly. Maybe 500, in a couple of weeks." 500, he repeated, and his voice trembled. "That's half my salary, Em. Do you even understand?" "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll stop. Just give me time." He looked at her, and the cold in his chest gave way to emptiness. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to get back the Emily he loved in Reno. Maybe she was no longer there. "Go to bed," he said finally, turning away. "We'll talk later." She nodded, walked into the bedroom, and the door closed. Jake sat back on the couch, staring into space. Vegas was moving both of them, but he wasn't sure they were going in the same direction. Jake felt that everything was going downhill for a long time, but he held on to hope as a lifeline. After that night at Mirage, when he saw Emily and Tony, they had a hard time maintaining a semblance of normalcy. He didn't make any scandals, didn't follow her, didn't check her phone, he just waited for her to come to her senses. She promised to stop, but the word hung in the air like cigarette smoke that dissipates but leaves a smell. The money continued to flow out not in hundreds at once, but in small amounts, which she attributed to taxi or drinking with friends. He nodded, although he knew it was a lie. He knew, but was silent. Working at the Pinnacle became his refuge. 12 hours of silence, steps on the marble, camera checks there, he could turn his head off. Rico noticed that he became more silent, but did not bother with questions. Travis invited him back to the casino a couple of times, but Jake refused. Mirage was now like a thorn in his memory. He would return home, make coffee if Emily was there, or just fall asleep if she wasn't. She left more and more often, returned later, and he stopped asking where she was. The answers would still be empty. But that night something completely broke. It was Friday, almost 3 weeks after that fight. Jake finished his shift early, the residents were quiet, and Rico let him out at 5 in the morning instead of 7. He rode home in a taxi, looking at the empty streets of Vegas, where only the cleaners and the occasional drunk were reminders of the chaos of the night. The thought of the day off was spinning in my head. Tomorrow he was free. Maybe it was worth talking to Emily for real. Don't shout, don't blame, but just ask. What does she want? And what does he want? They haven't spoken normally since that night, only short phrases. Have you eaten? Change of norms. Good night. Like strangers. He opened the apartment door at 5:30. It was dark, quiet inside, and smelled of stale air. Emily was not there. He threw his cap on the table, turned on the kitchen light, and took a beer out of the refrigerator. I sat down on the sofa, turned on the TV, some old movie about cowboys, but stared into space. The clock was ticking, the beer was getting cold in my hand. He waited. Not on purpose, it just happened that way. She came in at 6:47. Jake heard the key scraping in the lock, then steps uneven, stumbling. The door slammed and Emily appeared in the doorway of the living room. She was wearing the same black dress from Mirage, but now it was wrinkled, one shoulder had slipped, the hem had ridden up. Her hair is disheveled, her lipstick is smudged, and she's holding a bag and shoes. She looked not just drunk, but squeezed out like a lemon after a party. She didn't notice him right away. She threw her bag on the floor, muttered something incomprehensible, and staggered towards the bathroom. Jake was silent. He watched her disappear behind the door and heard the water turn on. Something inside him clenched, not anger, not pain, but some kind of cold awareness. He put the beer on the table, stood up, and followed her. The door to the bathroom was ajar. Emily stood at the sink, removing her makeup with a cotton pad, her dress lying on the floor. She was in lingerie, black lace, which he did not recognize. Jake froze in the doorway, and then his gaze fell on the laundry basket. On top lay her panties, the same black, but crumpled, with stains that left no doubt. Wet, sticky traces, a foreign smell, not hers, not his. Evidence that did not require words. He stood looking at it, and the world seemed to slow down. My heart was pounding, but my hands were icy. He didn't scream or rush towards her. He simply said, quietly, but in such a way that she shuddered, "Emily." She turned around, her eyes widening. The cotton pad fell out of my hands, leaving a black streak of mascara on my cheek. "Jake, are you home?" "Yes," he said, his voice as smooth as steel. "I'm home. Where have you been?" She hesitated, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm with my friends, you know." "With friends," he repeated, stepping inside. He nodded towards the basket. "What is this?" Emily followed his gaze, and her face turned pale. She opened her mouth, closed it, then straightened up, as if deciding not to hide. "Are you looking through my underwear now?" "I don't fumble," he said, the coldness in his voice growing. It's on top, and I'm not blind. Whose footprints are these? She was silent, looking away. The water was still running in the sink, dripping onto the floor. Finally, she turned off the tap and turned to him, crossing her arms. What do you want to hear? The truth, he said. You were with someone. I'm not an idiot. Yes, she said suddenly, sharply, as if tearing off a band-aid. Yes, I was. So what? Jake froze as if he had been hit. He was expecting this, but hearing it still felt like a knife in the chest. With whom? Who cares? She snapped. With Tony. That's him, if you care so much. Tony, Jake repeated, the name burning his tongue. That guy from the casino? Did you sleep with him? Yes, she said, looking into his eyes. Once. Today. Now what? He looked at her, and chaos was spinning in his head. He saw her in Mirage, saw how she laughed with this Tony, but he thought flirting, drunken dancing, maybe the border, but not that. Not treason. He clenched his fists, then unclenched them. The voice became quieter, but firmer. Out. Emily blinked as if she didn't understand. What? Out, he repeated, stepping towards her. Take your things and leave. I won't live with this. She stared at him, and suddenly her face twisted not from tears, but from anger. She stepped closer, almost shouting. Are you serious? Are you kicking me out? For what? Because I want to live and not rot in this hole. Live, he barked, losing control. Having sex with some freak, is that what you call life? Yes, she shouted, her voice breaking. Yes, Jake, I want passion, parties, men. I want to feel something, not sit here while you guard other people's cars. You're just a security guard, and I'm tired of pretending that I have enough of it. The words hit me like a slap in the face. He took a step back, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. Just a security guard, he repeated slowly. This is what I have become for you. Yes, she said, quieter, but definitely. You're a good guy, Jake, but that's not enough. Vegas is not Reno. Everything is faster, it's brighter, and I want to be a part of it. And you can't give that to me. He looked at her, and the anger began to flow out, leaving a void. He nodded, as if agreeing with something within himself. You know what? You're right. I can't, and I don't want to. She fell silent, waiting for him to continue. He turned and walked into the living room, picked up her bag from the floor, and threw it at her feet. You're free now, but so am I. Emily stood looking at the bag, then at him. Are you serious? It couldn't be more serious, he said, crossing his arms. Leave. Now. She snorted as if she didn't believe it, but began to get ready. She grabbed her dress from the bathroom floor, her shoes, her bag. You'll be sorry, she said, throwing the strap over her shoulder. You will be left alone in this hole, and I will live. Good luck, he said coldly. Prove that Vegas is worth it. She froze in the doorway, looking at him. You don't understand. You will never understand. Maybe, he nodded, but I won't put up with this crap. The door slammed, and she left. Jake stood in the middle of the room, listening to her footsteps fade down the corridor. Then he sat down on the sofa, took the half-drunk beer, and took a sip. It was warm, bitter, but he drank to the bottom. The 2 days after Emily left were strangely calm for Jake. He didn't call her, didn't write, didn't look for her. He spent the first day at home, cleaning up signs of her presence, throwing out the trash from the bathroom, wiping down the kitchen counter, and putting her Lake Tahoe mug in a box. He didn't touch her clothes in the closet, but he put everything else that reminded him of her out of sight. The second day he went on shift at the Pinnacle, and the work helped him turn off his head. Rico noticed that he was more silent than usual, but he just muttered, "Hold on, brother," and left him alone. Jake was grateful for that. He didn't sleep much a couple of hours in the morning, a couple in the evening before his shift, but the fatigue was not physical, but some kind of internal, deep one. He thought about what he had told her. You're free now, but so am I. These words swirled around in his head, and the more he thought about them, the more clearly he realized that this was not just an outburst of anger. This is the end. He didn't want her back. Not after what I saw, not after her words. You are just a security guard. Vegas took her, or she left on her own, but Jake decided that he would not carry this burden any further. On Sunday morning, after his shift, he went to a 24-hour cafe near his home, grabbed coffee, and asked the waitress where to find a lawyer on his day off. She shrugged, but the guy at the next table, a shabby man in a wrinkled shirt, overhearing, suggested, "There is an office on Fremont Street, open 24/7. Divorces, bankruptcies, everything is fast." Jake nodded, wrote down the address on a napkin, and drove there straight from the cafe. The office was small, with a faded "Legal Aid Now" sign and the smell of old paper inside. The lawyer, a balding man in his 50s named Marvin, listened to his story for half an hour while drinking coffee from a plastic cup. Marvin filled out the paperwork, printed it out on an ancient printer, and said, "Sign here. Submit it tomorrow. She'll be notified in a couple of days if the address is correct." Jake signed, left $100 deposit, and left with a copy of the documents in his pocket. He didn't feel relief, but he didn't feel heaviness anymore. It was a step, the first one in a long time that he made himself. Emily returned on Monday evening, 2 days after that night. Jake had just come home from work, sat in the kitchen with a can of beer, and looked out the window at the parking lot. He heard the key turn in the lock and tensed. The door opened, and she walked in, wearing jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, a bag slung over her shoulder, her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She looked tired, but not broken. There were no tears or guilt in her eyes, only a slight mockery, as if she was waiting for him to give in first. She dropped her bag on the floor, crossed her arms, and leaned against the doorframe. "Well," she said, looking at him, "I hope you're not angry already. It's been 2 days. It's time to cool down." Jake looked at her without getting up. Her voice was so familiar, but now it grazed my ears like a stranger. He didn't answer right away. He finished his beer, put the can on the table, and stood up. He went to the drawer next to the sofa, where the papers he had taken from Marvin that morning lay. He took them, returned to the table, and threw the stack in front of her. The sheets plopped onto the tabletop, the top one folding over to reveal the word "divorce" in bold letters. "Here," he said calmly. "I submitted it today. You can sign it whenever you want." Emily stared at the papers, and her face changed. First there was shock. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, as if she didn't believe it. Then anger, eyebrows knitted, cheeks flushed. She grabbed the top sheet, skimmed it, then threw it back on the table. "Are you serious?" Her voice trembled, but she immediately pulled herself together. "Have you filed for divorce? Have you?" "Yes," he said, crossing his arms. "I." She laughed short, sharply, almost hysterically. "God, Jake, I thought you decided to make some noise, kick me out for show, and then call me back. And you, did you really do that? Did you think I would sit and wait for you to take a walk?" he asked, his voice cold but level. "After what I saw, after what you said?" She stepped towards him, her eyes sparkling. "What did you see? One night? One time? Are you ruining everything because of this?" "One night?" He raised his voice, but then lowered his tone. I saw your panties in the basket. I saw you in the Mirage with that Tony, and I heard you say that I'm just a security guard and you need passion. It's not just one night. It's you. You left a long time ago. I just noticed too late." She fell silent, looking at him. Then she snorted, brushing her hair out of her face. "You're so right, aren't you, Mr. Honesty? What do you think I was supposed to sit here and do cross-stitch while you're on shift?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "You could have said that you felt bad. You could have left honestly. But you chose the casino, this Tony, and a lie. I'm not going to eat this." "Oh, come on," she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. The papers jumped. "Do you think you're better? Do you think I didn't see how you look at those rich girls in your pinnacle? You'd like to hang out there too, but you're too weak. Jake shook his head, almost smiling bitterly, tiredly. You don't know what you're talking about. I don't dream about their life. I'm working so that we have something of our own. And you just ran away to someone else. To someone else's, she stepped towards him, almost nose to nose. Tony is no stranger. He knows how to live. He doesn't sit in a booth and count pennies. He takes everything from Vegas, and I want the same. Then take it, Jake said, stepping back. Take your Tony, your parties, your bets, but without me. Emily froze, looking at him. Her chest heaved, her hands trembled, but she did not cry. She's not one to break down. Do you really think you can cope without me? She asked, lowering her voice. You'll be left alone, Jake. Alone in this hole, with your work and your beer. Maybe, he nodded, but I can handle it. What about you? Do you think Tony will be with you forever, or until he gets tired of you? She pursed her lips as if he had hit her sorely. It's none of your business, she finally snapped. I'll figure it out myself. So figure it out, he said, pointing to the papers. Sign when you're ready. The lawyer's address is there. Emily looked at the table, then at him. Her face was a mixture of shock and anger. She didn't expect him to leave first. She thought that he would cling, beg, like in the old films where husbands forgive everything for the sake of love. But Jake wasn't like that. Not now. You'll be sorry, she said, grabbing her bag. You will come running to me when you realize what you have lost. I haven't come running for 3 years, he said quietly, and I won't start now. She snorted, turned, and walked towards the door. She stopped on the threshold, throwing over her shoulder. You're boring, Jake. That's why I left. And you're empty, he answered, looking at her back. That's why I let you go. The door slammed, and she disappeared. Jake stood listening to the silence. Then he sat down at the table, took the papers, and carefully folded them back into the pile. He didn't know whether she would sign them right away or drag her feet, but it didn't matter anymore. He made his move. For the first time in a long time, he felt not like a victim, but like someone who decides. Outside the window, Vegas was noisy neon, cars, other people's lives. Jake opened another beer and drank to his freedom. It was expensive, but he was willing to pay. After Emily left for the second time, slamming the door with divorce papers on the table, Jake waited for silence, but received only an echo of it. He didn't call her, didn't write, didn't check where she was or with whom. He knew she wouldn't just disappear. That wasn't her style. Emily loved drama, loved being the center of things, and he was sure that she would try to drag this out, turn the divorce into a game where she could squeeze out at least something pity, money, time. But Jake has already decided he won't play. The first days after her departure passed in routine. Work at the Pinnacle, coffee in the morning, beer in the evening. He didn't touch her things in the closet. He left them as a reminder that it was her choice, not his. The lawyer, Marvin, called 3 days later, saying that the divorce notice had been delivered to Emily at the address of her friend Lisa, the redhead from the casino whose name she had mentioned a couple of times. She got the papers, Marvin said, chomping something into the phone. Now we're waiting for an answer. If he doesn't sign within a month, we'll sue by default. How are you holding up? Jake responded briefly. Yes, do your thing. There was no emotion in his voice. He turned it off. Emily showed up a week later, not in person via SMS. Jake was sitting on the couch, watching some stupid reality TV show about chefs, when his phone buzzed on the table. Her number appeared on the screen, and he froze, looking at it as if it were a mine. The message was long. Jake, I received your papers. Do you really think that this is normal? Make me look guilty, kick me out, and now a divorce? I didn't sign anything, and I'm not going to. We can talk like adults. I don't want war, but you're pushing me. I'm alone, it's hard for me, and you just sit and pretend that you don't care. Let's meet and discuss. I'm not your enemy. He read it twice, feeling something stir within him, not pity, but irritation. She played the victim again, as if he had abandoned her for the sake of the casino and other people's men. He didn't answer immediately. He turned off the TV, took a beer from the refrigerator, and sat in the kitchen, looking at the text. Then he wrote, "I won't meet. Sign the papers, or I'll see you in court. The choice is yours." The answer came 5 minutes later. "Are you seriously that stubborn? I'm trying to make things work, but you're just pushing. It's not fair." Jake chuckled, put the phone down, and finished his beer. Set it up. She slept with Tony, spent their money, called him a nobody, and now, fix it? He didn't write anymore. Let him think what he wants. Emily didn't sign the papers on time. Marvin called a month later, in mid-May, and said she was being evasive. "He doesn't answer calls, he doesn't show up for meetings," he said, rustling papers. "We can go to court. Everything is clear with us, you gave her a chance, she blew it. The judge will divorce you without her consent if we prove that she was notified. When can you come in?" Jake made an appointment for the next day after his shift. Marvin's office looked the same, dusty, cramped, with the smell of coffee and old files. Jake sat down opposite, wearing a uniform jacket, not yet taking off his cap. Marvin handed him new documents, a petition to the court. "Sign here," he said, pointing his finger at the line. "The date of the hearing will be in a couple of weeks. She will be summoned. Whether she comes or not is not important. We will divorce you anyway." "Can she challenge me?" Jake asked, taking the pen. "Maybe," Marvin shrugged. "But she has no reason. You have been married for 3 years. There are no children. There is no property in common. She can play for time, but she will not win. What do you want to divide?" "Nothing," Jake said, signing. "Just the end." Marvin nodded as if he had heard this 1,000 times. "Then it's simple. See you in court." The trial was scheduled for Tuesday morning, May 27th. Jake took the day off, put on his only decent shirt, a blue, slightly wrinkled one, and drove to the courthouse on Stewart Avenue. The hall was small, with wooden benches and an air conditioner that hummed like a tractor. Marvin sat nearby, leafing through a file, until the judge, an elderly woman with a tired face, called up their case. Carter v. Carter. "Emily has arrived." Jake saw her when she entered the hall, 10 minutes late. She was wearing jeans, a black top, and sunglasses pulled down on her head. She didn't look like a victim, but like someone who wanted to appear cooler than she was. She sat across the aisle without looking at him and began whispering to a woman next to her, apparently a lawyer hired at the last moment. The judge cleared her throat for silence. "Mr. Carter has filed for divorce due to irreconcilable differences," she began, looking at the papers. "Mrs. Carter, did you receive the notice?" Emily stood up, straightening her hair. "Yes, Your Honor, but I disagree." "On what grounds?" asked the judge, raising an eyebrow. Emily hesitated, glancing at her lawyer. She stood up, adjusting her glasses. "My client believes that the divorce is premature. She is asking for time to reconcile. Mr. Carter kicked her out of the house without warning, leaving her without funds. This is not fair." Jake clenched his jaw, but remained silent. Marvin stood up, his voice calm, matter-of-fact. "Your Honor, my side has provided evidence of notice. Mrs. Carter received the papers over a month ago and has not taken steps towards reconciliation. Mr. Carter is not obligated to support her after the actual breakup. The marriage has broken down, and he asks for the process to be completed." The judge looked at Emily. "Mrs. Carter, is there anything you would like to add?" Emily stood up again, crossing her arms. "I just want him to give me a chance. He kicked me out without even really talking to me. I'm not ready to give up. It's too fast." Jake felt anger stir within him, but suppressed it. He stood up as the judge nodded at him. "Can I say?" "Speak," she said. He looked at Emily, then at the judge. The voice was even, without trembling. "I didn't kick her out for no reason. I found evidence of betrayal. She spent our money on a casino and another man. I gave her a chance to leave on her own. She didn't leave. I don't bargain. I'm freeing myself." The hall froze. Emily turned pale, then flushed as she stepped across the aisle towards him. "You're lying. You're turning everything around. I don't." "Mrs. Carter," the judge interrupted, banging her gavel. "Sit down. This is not a talk show." Emily plopped down on the bench, glaring at him. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she waved it off. The judge leafed through the papers, then looked at them both. "You have no children, no joint property. Mrs. Carter, you have not provided evidence that the divorce is unfounded. Mr. Carter gave you time to respond. You did not use it. I see enough grounds for a divorce." "But Emily began, but the judge raised her hand. "Enough. The decision has been made. The marriage is dissolved. Officially from today. Details in the documents." The hammer hit, and it was all over. Marvin patted Jake on the shoulder. "Congratulations. You are free." Jake nodded, but didn't smile. He watched as Emily stood up, grabbing her bag. She glanced at him angry, confused, and flew out of the room, almost knocking over her lawyer. He didn't follow her. It was hot outside. The sun was baking the asphalt. Jake stood at the entrance, looking at the cars, while Marvin lit a cigarette. "She thought you'd give up," he said, exhaling smoke. "Most people do." "I'm not the majority," Jake replied, putting his hands in his pockets. "I see," Marvin chuckled. "What's next?" "I work. I live," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "So far." The divorce left a void, but not one Jake expected. It wasn't desperation or melancholy, rather, as if he had thrown off a heavy backpack after a long hike. The first days after the trial, he lived by inertia: work at the Pinnacle, coffee in the morning, beer in the evening. The apartment on Desert Rose seemed too big without Emily, although he finally took her things out, put them in boxes, and left them with Lisa, sending Emily a short SMS. "Your junk is with your friend. Take it whenever you want." She didn't answer, and he didn't wait. But the routine began to weigh on me. Night shifts, the same faces of residents, endless circles around the perimeter, all this began to remind him of who he was for Emily, just a security guard. He didn't want to prove anything to her, but to himself. Yes, Vegas was a city of opportunity, and Jake decided it was time to take something of his own from it. The idea to change jobs came by chance. On one of his shifts at the Pinnacle, he started talking to Mr. Gibson, the old man with the cat who regularly invited him for coffee. Gibson turned out to be not just a rich eccentric. He was the former owner of a chain of car dealerships in California and now lived on interest and memories. They sat on the fifth-floor balcony, looking out at the lights of the Strip, while Gibson's cat, Marge, rubbed up against Jake's legs. "You're a good guy, Jake," Gibson said, taking a sip from his glass of whiskey. "But you're burying yourself here. Security in a place like this is for the young until they find something better." "I like the job," Jake shrugged, stroking the cat. "Stable." "Stable is a trap," Gibson chuckled. "Listen, I have an acquaintance, Richard Kane. Businessman, millions in real estate. He needs someone for private security, not just to stand at the gate, but to ride with him, keep an eye on things. You come over. Do you want me to talk?" Jake thought about it. Private security is on another level. Not just the perimeter and cameras, but working with the people who hold Vegas in their hands. More money, more risk, more freedom. He nodded. "Talk. We'll see." 2 days later, Gibson called. "Richard wants to meet. Tomorrow, at the office on Las Vegas Boulevard. Wear something decent, not this uniform." The meeting with Richard Kane took place in a skyscraper overlooking the stripped glass walls, leather chairs, a secretary with perfect hair. Kane was about 50 years old, with gray temples and a look that pierced right through. He shook Jake's hand, pointed to the chair, and got straight to the point. "Gibson says you're reliable," Kane said, tapping his pen on the table. "I need a man who doesn't talk, doesn't break down, and knows how to keep his head cool. Has it ever happened that you proved this?" Jake nodded. "I work at night at Pinnacle. Drunk residents, attempted break-ins, noisy parties. I dealt with everything, without unnecessary stuff." Kane narrowed his eyes. "Are you good with weapons?" "Yes," said Jake. "I shot at a shooting range in Reno. I don't have a license, but I can get one." "You will," Kane nodded. "I pay 30 an hour, plus bonuses. The schedule is flexible, sometimes day, sometimes night, sometimes trips. I don't skimp on trifles, but I demand 100% of everything. Do you agree?" Jake did the math in his head. 30 per hour is more than 50,000 per year if the schedule is full. Twice as much as Pinnacle. He extended his hand. "Agree." Kane grinned as he shook it. "Welcome to the game, Carter." A week later, Jake resigned from the Pinnacle. Rico patted him on the back and wished him luck, and Travis called for one last drink, but Jake refused. It was time to move on. The new job began with training, a weapons license, a couple of courses in personal protection, a suit instead of a uniform. Kane gave him a Glock and a black Escalade for travel. For the first month, Jake accompanied him to meetings, casinos, offices, private clubs, where the air smelled of money and power. He stood behind Kane, was silent, watched, studied. This was Vegas from the other side of the mirror, not the noisy chaos of the Strip, but the cold calculation of those who ran it. Kane turned out to be demanding, but fair. One day, after a long night at the Bellagio, where some drunk investor was trying to get into a fight, Kane slipped Jake 100 on top. "For not letting me strangle him," he said, grinning. Jake nodded, put the money away, and realized that he liked this being not just a cog, but part of something bigger. He moved from Desert Rose to a small apartment closer to the center, a one-room apartment with windows facing west, where sunsets filled the room with orange. The furniture remained the same, but he bought a new sofa, the first step towards living without a past. Work took up all the time, but he did not complain. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward. Emily remained in Vegas, but her world was different. She didn't disappear after the trial. Jake heard about her through mutual friends like Travis, who was still hanging around the casino. She lived with Lisa, then rented a room somewhere on the outskirts, and continued to hang out with Kate and Tony. The lights of the Strip were still on for her, but their warmth had faded. Tony, as Jake predicted, didn't stick around. After a couple of months. He moved on to a new girl, some model from Los Angeles, leaving Emily on the sidelines of his parties. Her patron disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. The money ran out, but the habit of luxury remained. Excitement became her drug. She could no longer just sit at home. She needed to play, hang out, shine. But new parties are not free. To stay afloat, she began dating rich men. Age, status, marital status no longer mattered. The main thing is who pays for dinner and who leaves the room key. Emily didn't notice how Vegas became her cage. After her divorce from Jake, she stayed afloat as best she could. Night parties, laughter with Lisa and Kate, cocktails at someone else's expense. She told herself that this was temporary, that soon she would find her big win and break out of this cycle. But the lights of the Strip that once lured her with the promise of freedom began to dim, leaving only a cold glow. And the bills, as luck would have it, grew. For the first months after the trial, she lived with Lisa in a cramped apartment on the northern outskirts of Vegas, which always smelled of cigarettes and cheap coffee. Lisa was kind. She didn't charge rent, she shared food, she even picked up shifts at MGM when she could. But Emily didn't want to work as a waitress. It was too boring, too humiliating after those nights when she felt like a queen at the poker table, even if she was just watching. She quit after 2 weeks, telling Lisa, "I'll find something better. It's not mine." "Then look quickly," said Lisa, taking a drag from her cigarette. "I'm not a millionaire, Em, and I'm cramped here alone." Emily nodded, but deep down she knew that better would not fall from the sky. The money was melting away. She rented a room in a motel on Fremont Street, a cheap one, with threadbare carpet and a humming air conditioner for $300 a month. It was all she could afford after the last of her savings were spent on bars, taxis, and new shoes so as not to look shabby next to Kate and her company. But the parties were not free, and the excitement that she picked up like a virus demanded more and more. It all started with a little thing. After Tony left her for that Los Angeles model, Emily was left without a sponsor. He never gave her money directly, but with him she didn't pay for drinks, didn't stand in lines at clubs, didn't count change for a taxi. Without him, her world narrowed to those places where they were allowed in for free and those people who were still ready to treat her. Kate and Lisa helped, but they barely had enough to live on themselves. Emily began to play herself not just to watch, but to sit at the tables. The first attempt was at Mirage, the night Travis saw her with a cocktail. She took the last $50, exchanged them for chips, and sat down at the cheapest poker table, $5 entry fee. Kate was teaching her the basics, and Emily thought she could get away with at least something. She sat clutching the cards, trying not to twitch, as Kate had taught, but she lost everything in half an hour. The guy opposite, a fat man with a gold ring, grabbed her chips with a grin and said, "Beginners have no luck, baby." She stood up, feeling the heat rising in her cheeks, and walked towards the bar. But that didn't stop her. The excitement was like an itch. The more she scratched, the stronger it became. She returned to the casino again and again, took the 20s from her wallet that she should have saved for food, and bet them. Sometimes she was lucky. She once won $100 at MGM, and it was a thrill like an electric shock. She bought everyone drinks, laughed with Lisa until the morning, feeling on top. But more often than not, she lost, and each loss pulled her deeper into the hole. By the end of summer, there was no money left. The motel demanded payment for the next month, and in the wallet there was $12 and change. Lisa offered to return to her, but Emily refused. Her pride did not allow her. She sat in her room, looking at the peeling paint on the walls, and realized that something needed to be done. The excitement didn't let go, the parties beckoned, but she didn't want to live on water and noodles from the supermarket. Then she took the first step into the abyss. The idea came from a bar at Caesar's Palace. Emily sat with Kate, sipping the cheap beer she bought her. Kate was chatting about some client who left her 100 tips for smiling when a guy walked up to their table. About 40, in a wrinkled suit, with a red face and the smell of whiskey. He plopped down next to me without asking and said, "Ladies, are you bored? I can treat you." Kate rolled her eyes, but Emily smiled, tightly but politely. Why not? He ordered them margaritas and introduced himself as Dan, a businessman from Texas. He chatted incessantly about oil, about his wife who stayed at home, about how Vegas frees the soul. Emily listened with half an ear, nodding until he placed his hand on her knee. She tensed, but didn't take it away. She noticed how he handed the bartender a 50 kopeck piece without blinking. He had money, but she didn't. "You're cute," he said, leaning closer. "Should we go for a walk?" Kate chuckled, whispering to her, "Watch out, Em, that one's fat." But Emily stood up, straightening her dress. "Let's go," she said, and Dan broke out into a smile. They went outside, where the neon was in their eyes. He led her to his room at Caesar's, not to the tables, not to the bar, but straight upstairs. Emily knew where this was going, but she didn't stop. In the elevator, he pressed her against the wall, puffing into her neck, and she looked at her reflection in the mirror, someone else's face, empty eyes. In the room, he threw $200 on the table, saying, "For company." She took them without looking him in the face and stayed for an hour. When she came out, her legs were shaking, but there was money in her bag. $200 was more than she'd seen in a month. She bought a ticket to the casino, sat down at the table, and lost half of it overnight. The rest was spent on taxis and drinks. This was her first step, and it didn't seem as scary as she thought. From that evening, everything started to turn around. Emily began to meet men not every day, but regularly. In bars, at tables, in clubs where rich visitors were looking for entertainment. Old, young, married, she didn't care. She didn't call it prostitution. For her, it was a game like poker. A smile, flirting, a couple of hours in the room, and money appeared in your pocket. Sometimes $100, sometimes 300, once 500 from some old guy in Chicago who wanted to just talk, but still put his hand up his skirt. She got involved quickly. The money went to the casino. Now she played more often, bet more, hoping to hit the jackpot. She was lucky less often than she wanted, but every win was like a breath of air. She rented a new, better room in a motel closer to the strip, updated her wardrobe, short dresses, bright lipstick, heels. Lisa and Kate noticed the changes, but didn't ask. They themselves knew how Vegas breaks people. "You better be careful," Kate said one day, lighting a cigarette at the bar. "These men are not toys." "I can handle it," Emily replied, taking a sip of her cocktail. "This is temporary." Kate chuckled but remained silent. Emily didn't want to hear the truth. She couldn't stop. Excitement and money were intertwined into one knot, and she ran after them like a mirage. One day in August, she ran into Tony at the Bellagio. He was with that model, laughing, holding her by the waist. Emily was standing at the bar in a red dress, with a glass in her hand, when he noticed her. He approached, grinning. Are you still here?" he said, looking her over. "You look busy." "And you're still the same," she answered, pursing her lips. "How are you?" "Great," he nodded, nodding towards the model. "What about you? I heard your guard is now hanging out with the rich people." She froze, then shrugged. "I don't care. I'm on my own." Tony chuckled. "I see. Well, good luck, baby." He left, leaving her with a bitter taste in her mouth. Emily finished her glass and went to the tables. She needed money. The night was just beginning, and her pocket was empty. She found a new friend, a bald man in a suit with an accent from New York. He gave her 200 for an hour, and she left, feeling the abyss beneath her feet grow deeper. But she could no longer stop. Vegas held her tightly, and she fell, step by step, to where the lights no longer warmed her. Jake's life took on a new rhythm after moving to private security. Working with Richard Kane wasn't just a change of scenery, it changed the way he viewed Vegas. He was no longer the guy in the uniform cap, walking in circles checking cameras. Now he drove a black Escalade, wore a dark suit and a Glock on his belt, accompanying Kane to meetings where millions flowed from hand to hand over a glass of whiskey. It was a world where words mattered less than gestures and money spoke loudest. Jake didn't get involved in Kane's business. His job was simple: keep his eyes open, his mouth closed, and his boss's back safe. And he managed. Kane appreciated his silence. One day, after a long trip to Reno, where they were meeting with some real estate developer, Kane said over his shoulder, "You're not making a fuss, Carter. That's rare. Most people would be whining or asking questions by now." Jake just nodded. "I don't get paid to talk." Kane chuckled, and the next week he added a bonus 500 on top without explanation. Jake began to get used to this world. He didn't become one of the people. He protected the rich with their yachts and penthouses, but he felt closer to them than to those who crowded the slots on the strip. His new apartment overlooking the sunset was a sanctuary: minimal furniture, a coffee maker, a couple of books he borrowed from Gibson. He even got into the habit of reading in the evenings, something about the history of Nevada or old detective stories. It helped me turn my head off after work. Emily almost disappeared from his thoughts. Not really. It remained somewhere on the periphery, like an old scar that no longer hurts, but sometimes reminds of itself. He didn't ask about her, didn't look for her, didn't check. The divorce was the end, and he had no intention of looking back. But Vegas was a small town, despite its lights, and the rumors got around. Jake finished his shift by accompanying Kane to dinner at Wynn, where he was negotiating something with two Asian men in expensive suits. Everything went smoothly, and Kane let him go early. "Go get some rest, Carter. Tomorrow at 9 I'll see you." Jake nodded, returned the car to the garage, and decided to go to Neon Spoon, the same diner where he and Emily ate on their first night in Vegas. "Not out of sentimentality, I just wanted a burger and silence after the noise of the day." He was sitting by the window, munching on a potato, when Travis burst through the door. The former colleague from the Pinnacle has not changed, still the same lanky guy with a wide smile and a habit of speaking louder than necessary. He noticed Jake immediately, plopped down opposite him without invitation, and slammed his hand on the table. Dude, how old? You look like a human now, not like a zombie from the night shifts, Travis said, grinning. I heard you hang out with cool guys. Jake nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. Working private security. Cool, cool, Travis nodded like a dummy. Rico is bored, guess what? He says it's boring without you no one catches drunken idiots so quickly. Say hi, Jake said, smiling slightly. How are you? Yeah, as usual, Travis shrugged. Shifts beer, my girl is yelling again that I'm a loser. Everything is the same. How are you? After the divorce? Fine, Jake answered shortly. He didn't like to delve into the past, and Travis knew that. But Travis couldn't keep his mouth shut. He leaned closer, lowering his voice, although there was almost no one in the diner. Listen, I saw your ex here, Emily, a couple of days ago. Jake froze, the fork with the potatoes hovering in the air. He didn't want to ask, but Travis had already continued without waiting. There was a thing at the Bellagio, he said, looking at Jake as if checking his reaction. She's there. Well, not as a waitress, that's for sure. Apparently, she works in the sexual sphere. She serves rich guys for money. I saw her go into the elevator with some old man, all dressed up, but her eyes were empty. I was thinking about whether to tell you or not, but I decided that maybe you don't know. Jake lowered his fork to his plate. Nothing moved in my chest, neither anger, nor pity, nor surprise. Just cold clarity. He nodded, looking out the window where the lights of Vegas were flashing like always. Understood. Travis hesitated, expecting something more, a scream, a curse, at least some kind of emotion. But Jake was silent, and this confused him. Are you okay? I thought you were going to explode or something. For what? Jake asked, turning to him. The voice was flat, almost boring. Her choice is her path. It doesn't concern me. Well, yes, but still, Travis scratched the back of his head. You've been together for 3 years. Do you really care? Jake shrugged, pushing his plate away. They were. Now they're not. She wanted Vegas, she got it. I'm not her nanny. Travis looked at him as if he was seeing him for the first time. You've changed, dude. Before, you would have at least thrown a beer at the wall. It used to be before, Jake said, throwing a 20 on the table. Now I have something to do. He stood up, tapped Travis on the shoulder, and walked out. The night air was warm, with the taste of dust and gasoline. Jake walked towards his apartment, slowly, looking at the lights that were no longer blinding. Travis's words swirled around in my head, but they didn't stick. Emily in the sexual sphere, at the Bellagio, with rich guys, it was logical. She was always after the glitz, the money, the things Vegas promised but rarely delivered. He saw her fall, step by step, from the casino to Tony, from Tony to this. And he wasn't surprised. At home, he opened a beer, sat on the sofa, and turned on the TV, but did not watch. Thoughts were somewhere further. He remembered her in Mirage, in that black dress, with Tony. I remembered her words. I want passion, parties, men. She got what she wanted, but she paid more for it than she thought. Jake felt neither gloating nor regret, just a slight emptiness, like after a long day. This was her life, her abyss. He chose a different path. The next day, he went to see Kane as usual. The meeting was in the office, something about a new project in the south of the city. Jake stood at the door, half listening as Kane argued with some lawyer. Work went on as usual, and that was all he needed now. Emily remained somewhere there, in the Bellagio, among the lights and strange hands. And he was here, on the other side of the mirror, where the light was cold, but his own. And he didn't look back. Jake didn't plan on leaving Vegas so soon. After moving to private security, life seemed to get better. Working with Kane brought in money, the apartment became a home, and the routine took on meaning. He even began to think that he could stay here, build something of his own, and squeeze more out of the city than it took. But Travis's words about Emily working as a sex worker at the Bellagio were the last straw, not because he felt sorry for her or was angry, but because they reminded him, Vegas doesn't let go. He breaks everyone who stays too long, and Jake didn't want to be next. The decision did not come immediately. For several days after that meeting with Travis, he lived as usual, accompanied Kane, remained silent at meetings, returned home to beer and sunsets. But every time he drove past the strip, he saw her shadow, Emily in a red dress with empty eyes, entering the elevator with another uncle. It wasn't a pain he'd burned out long ago, but just a fact. She sold herself to Vegas, and the city gobbled her up like thousands of others. Jake realized he didn't want to wait for the same thing to happen to him. He spoke to Kane a week later. This was after another trip they went to Henderson, where Kane signed a contract for some warehouse complex. In the car on the way back, Jake looked out at the desert outside the window, while Kane flipped through papers in the back seat. "Boss," Jake said, keeping his eyes on the road, "I'm leaving." Kane looked up, narrowing his eyes. "What do you mean, I'm leaving?" "From work." "From Vegas," Jake clarified. "I'm leaving. I want to start somewhere else." Kane put the papers down, tapping his fingers on his knee. "You just got involved. The money is good, the job is stable. What's wrong?" "That's it," Jake said with a shrug. "It's just that this city, it's not for me. I thought I could do it, but no." Kane looked at him for a long time, then chuckled. "Gibson said you're not the type to settle down. Apparently, he was right. Where are you going?" "I don't know yet," Jake answered honestly. "Maybe back to Reno. Maybe further. I'll see." Kane nodded, as if he had expected this. "It's a shame to lose you, Carter. You're one of the best I've ever had. If you change your mind, call. The door is open." "Thanks," Jake said. "Appreciate it." He worked for another 2 weeks, giving Kane time to find a replacement. The new guy, an ex-Denver cop, turned out to be quite good, and Jake handed over the cases to him without any fuss. Kane wrote him a check for $2,000 on top for loyalty, as he said. Jake took the money, shook hands, and left. The fees were quick. He didn't have a lot of things his whole life fit into one suitcase and a couple of boxes. A Kane suit, a pair of jeans, t-shirts, boots, Gibson books, a coffee maker. The Ford F-150, the same one he and Emily drove to Vegas, sat in the parking lot, a little beat up, but alive. Jake checked the oil, filled the tank full, and threw the suitcase in the back seat. He sent the boxes by mail to Reno to an old friend who promised to shelter him until he found a place to live. He left everything else, the sofa, the table, the dishes, to the next tenant. He didn't need to bring Vegas with him. He spent his last evening with Travis and Rico. They met at a bar near Pinnacle, not a casino, but a simple place with wooden walls and an old jukebox. Travis ordered a beer, Rico ordered whiskey, and they drank to the new road. "Are you really leaving?" Travis asked, shaking his head. "I thought you were going to settle down here with these rich people." "Not mine," Jake said, twirling the bottle in his hands. "Too noisy." "And she?" Travis lowered his voice, nodding somewhere to the side, as if Emily might appear around the corner. "I heard she went downhill." "It's her business," Jake replied, emotionless. "I don't look back." Rico patted him on the shoulder. "That's right, brother. Vegas is a meat grinder. Leave while you're still alive." They sat for another hour, reminiscing about their shifts at Pinnacle, laughing at the drunk residents and Gibson's cat. Then Jake stood up, threw the money on the table, and said, "See you guys. Don't get lost." They hugged, and he walked off into the night. The morning was clear. The desert sky was clear, without clouds. Jake left at 6 while the city was still asleep. He drove down I-15, leaving the strip behind. In the back seat was a suitcase worn, with a U-Haul sticker, "New Life" inside. Some clothes, some money, some plans. He didn't know exactly where he was going. Reno was the first stop, but not the last. Maybe further to Oregon, maybe to Colorado. The main thing is to stay away from neon, which has ruined so many lives. In the rearview mirror, Vegas grew smaller, the golden casino towers, the pyramid of Luxor, the lights that flickered even during the day. He thought about Emily, but not for long. She stayed there, at the Bellagio, in rooms with rich uncles, in the world she chose. Her fall was her own, and Jake felt neither guilt nor desire to rescue her. She sold herself to the city, but he didn't. Emily stood on the balcony of her room at the Bellagio, looking up at the sky where the stars were drowning in the glow of neon. The October wind blew dust and pieces of advertising flyers along the strip, but here, at the height of the 20th floor, it was quiet. She was wearing a tight red dress, the same one that she bought with the first money she earned, with a deep neckline and a hem that barely covered her hips. It fit perfectly, emphasizing the curves that still attracted attention, but in the mirror, she already noticed small cracks, shadows under the eyes, a slight stoop, fatigue that was not hidden by lipstick. Below, the strip hummed with its eternal life. Tourists took photos at the fountains, cars honked in traffic, street performers caught change. She looked at it, clutching the cold metal of the railing, and thought how far she had come from Emily, who came here with Jake a year and a half ago. Then the city seemed like a promise to her, bright, loud, full of chances. Now he was just a cage where she sold herself by the hour to stay afloat. Her life after Jake left became an endless cycle. She did not return for the things he left with Lisa. Her pride did not allow it. Lisa called a couple of times and asked what to do with the boxes, but Emily waved her off. Throw it away if it's in the way. She didn't want to see the old photos, that Tahoe mug, reminders of who she was. She got a new motel room closer to the strip, a little nicer than the old one, with clean sheets and no cockroaches, but it still wasn't home. Money flowed like a river, sometimes thick, sometimes empty. Excitement consumed them faster than she could count. Kate and Lisa still stayed close, but their friendship became thinner. Kate, still as sharp-tongued, threw out barbs. "Are you a star now, Em? Will you be going to the VIP areas soon?" Lisa was silent, but there was concern in her gaze. Emily knew they could see her slipping, but she couldn't stop. Casinos, men, booze, this was her air, her way of not suffocating alone. She didn't call herself an easygoing girl, that word sounded too harsh. She simply met with those who paid, that's all. Today's client was waiting for her in the bedroom. She heard him coughing behind the closed door, an old, fat man of about 60, with a shiny face and a gold watch on his wrist. His name was Harry. He was from Detroit. He came to some conference. At the bar, he slipped her 300, whispering, "Shall we spend the evening, baby?" Emily nodded, smiled her practiced smile, and followed him into the elevator. Now he was sitting on the bed, unbuttoning his shirt, and she was lingering on the balcony, stalling for time. She looked at the sky, where the moon hung like a thin crescent, and suddenly remembered Jake. Not the one who kicked her out, not the one who filed for divorce, but the one who looked at her in Reno when they walked by Lake Tahoe. Then he saw her as a woman, not a commodity, not a bet in a game, but a person. He held her hand, laughed at her jokes, called her Em, with a warmth that she had not heard for a long time. She brushed it off at the time, thinking Vegas would give her more. But now, standing here, she realized he was the last person to see the real her. Harry coughed louder, muttering something like, "Are you coming?" Emily gripped the railing tighter, feeling the cold seep into her palms. She could have left, abandoned these 300, gone downstairs, disappeared. But where? She had nothing, no home, no friends, not even the Emily that was left in the past. Vegas took everything, leaving only this: the dress, the balcony, the man in the bedroom who paid for an hour of her time. She turned, taking one last look at the city lights. They no longer warmed up, they simply dazzled, like headlights on a highway. Then she entered the room, closed the glass door, and forced herself to smile. Harry patted the bed, grinning, and she stepped towards him, knowing that this was her choice, her path, her end. And somewhere out there, outside of Vegas, Jake was driving forward, leaving the city behind. Emily remained in his mirror, not as a memory, but as a lesson. And in this city where she was sold, no one was looking for her. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.